Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining today. So this is the first of a series of virtual and in-person events organized by the British Chamber. And this is our Leadership Forum 2021 on the topic of building a sustainable future. As you may know, the UK will be hosting this year's COP26 Global Climate Conference in Glasgow, starting in 3 weeks' time. So the British Chamber thought it would be great if we could perhaps organise a series of virtual and in-person events in the run-up to this major climate conference. The first in the series of events obviously is a tax event, which I'm very honoured, and it's my privilege to host and to moderate. Hopefully this will be as interesting to you all as it is to me. The impact of ESG, environmental social governance, on business taxation. So we have two major speakers today, but before that, I would like to thank our sponsors, Autonomous and Lux Dates, for helping organizing and sponsoring this series of events. Her Excellency Fleur Thomas will also be introducing the event, and we're very happy for Her Excellency to have accepted to speak in today's event. I'm very happy about that. So thank you again, Her Excellency. So this series of virtual and in-person events organized by the British Chamber start with tax, but we'll go into tomorrow and the next days. There'll be other events on financial services, business and innovation, on the legal side, all in connection with building a sustainable future. I think the time is right to hand over to Her Excellency, and after that, I'll quickly introduce our speakers of the day at Deloitte, whom I thank again and in advance for presenting today's topic.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm honoured to introduce the British Chamber of Commerce for Luxembourg's annual Leadership Forum on the topic of building a sustainable future. As you've just heard from Jonathan, the UK government is hosting the 26th COP in Glasgow from the 31st of October to the 12th of November. This is the biggest event of its type that the UK has ever hosted. We expect 30,000 visitors to Glasgow, which you can imagine presents its own challenges. This presents a unique opportunity to demonstrate UK global climate leadership on the world stage, and we are really focused on delivering our objectives to tackle climate change and deliver a green recovery and sustainable jobs. Sustainable finance is absolutely at the heart of the conference. COP26 must lay the ground for holistic discussions on climate finance and initiate a process by which the post-2025 climate finance goals will be determined. Developed countries must make good on their promise to mobilise at least $100 billion in climate finance per year to 2025. I'm sure some of you have heard our Prime Minister speak recently on this. The UK's leadership and diplomacy has secured new pledges, including from Germany, Canada and Japan at the G7 and the US. However, we urgently need new commitments to inform the conclusion of the donors' $100 billion delivery plan. Despite the economic emergency we face as a result of COVID-19, the UK took a decision to double to £11.9 billion its climate finance commitment for the period 21 to 25. The Luxembourg government has allocated £200 million for the period of 21 to 25 to combat climate change, and we're hopeful that Luxembourg will follow our example in revising their commitments too. International finance institutions must play their part, and we need to work towards unleashing the trillions in private and public sector finance required to secure global net zero. Realising the goals from the Paris Agreement and meeting global net zero requires a transformation of the global economic and financial ecosystem. Moving beyond international support, we need every financial decision to take climate change into account in order to mobilise the trillions of dollars of broader finance we need to rise to the challenges of the climate crisis. The UK is actively pressing for global action and working to support the development of international standards. At a recent G7, the UK succeeded in getting all G7 economies to set out a pathway to mandatory climate-related financial disclosures. To align the private sector with the UK's ambitious commitments on climate change, we need all businesses to have a clear plan, setting out specific targets and milestones for how they will transition to net zero. And we need every financial institution to have a clear plan, setting out specific targets and milestones of how they will transition to net zero too. This is why our COP26 presidency has launched a sector-wide strategic forum, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, catchily known as GFANZ. The GFANZ aims to broaden, deepen and raise ambition in the financial sector, allowing firms to demonstrate their collective commitments to supporting companies and countries to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. I encourage every financial industry participant today to check the options to join this great initiative. As we already know, Luxembourg is one of the leading centres for sustainable finance. The Luxembourg Green Exchange is issuing over 50% of all green bonds globally, and the reduced annual subscription tax rate for sustainable investment funds that follow environmental, socially responsible and governance strategies is further encouraging responsible investments. Following the UK's exit from the EU, sustainable finance is clearly an area where there is great potential to cooperate on a bilateral level between the UK and Luxembourg. But whilst I have a captive audience, let me just say a few words about the green finance in the UK. London has consistently ranked as one of the top global financial centres for green finance, coming first in green finance, human capital and infrastructure, reflecting the expertise and depth of the UK financial markets. But our ambition is for the UK to be the best place in the world for green and sustainable investment. The UK work in this area is underpinned by the groundbreaking Green Finance Strategy, published in 2019, setting out our comprehensive approach to greening our financial systems and mobilising finance for green and resilient growth. In September, the UK issued its inaugural Green Gilt. This first issuance of £10 billion marked the launch of the government's green financing programme, which will expand with the sale of green savings bonds later in the year. These products will raise money to finance projects with clearly defined environmental benefits. With over 70% of British people saying they want their investments to avoid harm and achieve good for people and the planet, the government will work with the Financial Conduct Authority to create a new sustainable investment label, a quality stamp if you like, so that consumers can clearly compare the impacts and sustainability of their investments for the first time. Information is the lifeblood of financial markets, but consumers don't have access to information on the relationship between the investments and sustainability. So this is why the UK government intends to introduce new economy-wide mandatory sustainability disclosure requirements for businesses. These new requirements will bring together and streamline all UK sustainability reporting requirements. All businesses will have to report on their impact on climate and the environment and the risks and opportunities these pose. This new regime will require for reporting beyond climate and include broader sustainability issues. It will also include environmental impact businesses and investments are creating based on definitions contained in the UK Green Taxonomy. We will ensure that the requirements are proportionate and workable for UK business. The transition to net zero will have significant implications for the whole economy with associated risks and opportunities. It's critical that market participants have access to the right information to allow them to accurately price investments in order for the UK to remain competitive. This is a fast-changing world. Regulations do not stand still. We're not making change for the sake of it. We're making changes based on what works best for the UK to support our economic, climate and environment ambitions. This is about ensuring we have a regulatory environment which is the right fit for the UK and ensuring we adapt it as the world changes. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you'll have a fruitful discussion today, and I'll hand now back to Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for kindly introducing the event today. All very positive messages, and I think we're all looking forward to the COP26 in Glasgow in 2 weeks' time. Amazing to hear 30,000 people will be coming to Glasgow. I mean, that's crazy. So it's going to be as you say, quite a challenge to actually manage this in itself in 3 weeks' time. It's my pleasure now to introduce Gregory and Joao at Deloitte, who will be speaking on the impact of ESG on business taxation. If any of the participants today, if any of you have any questions on to Gregory and Joao, please use the chat box, also the Q&A chat box, and I shall gladly moderate the Q&A session after Gregory and Joao will have presented the topic. So Gregory and João, it's my pleasure to introduce you. Thank you very much to you and to Deloitte for taking the time for us today for the British Chamber community. And I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jonathan. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for your time and for listening to us. My name is João Almeida, and I am a tax partner working on a cross-border tax team at Deloitte and also leading our tax team's focus on ESG. And with me today, I have the pleasure of having Gregory Julien, who is a tax senior manager of our team and highly specialized on ESG and on EU tax policy. Now, it is no news that ESG is currently a centerpiece of the world's leading policymakers and businesses. On 2020, we saw record-breaking levels of investments, for instance, in green bonds. Funds investing in sustainable assets are already surpassing $1 trillion USD, and the expectation is for this number to keep increasing. We have big private equity houses publicly announcing that all of their assets under management would be governed by ESG considerations. And obviously we have the European Union setting the agenda a bit worldwide on ESG, on reporting, incentives, etc. But the tendencies for the US and the rest of the world to also close in on the gap. So really a worldwide movement in this sense. It is also no news that the COVID-19 pandemic has intensified scrutiny of companies' ESG performance by the public, with stakeholders now being considered and not only shareholders. Now, even though there is no T in ESG, tax is indeed becoming a key variable of this equation, and not only because of its punitive outcome with the possibility of setting fines on failure to report, or with more favorable tax credits for investments or exemptions or less stringent limitations to the deductibility of certain expenses, but because of the importance of the contributions to the state budgets through the fair share of tax, of the adequate management of the tax risks and uncertainty arising from the recent global tax reset, and of how transparent and openly the taxpayers are able to communicate this and show to all stakeholders how they're handling their tax affairs. Now, all this translates into added value to businesses, to the brands, which will necessarily impact positively or negatively pricing adjustments of businesses, which obviously also impact the pricing of yields of funding, etc., etc. Now, on this initial slide, we wanted to, start by trying to show you how tax can be seen on the three dimensions of ESG. The easiest one and the most obvious one is the environmental, where you'll see what's so-called the green taxation, where environmental taxation and tax incentives and reliefs are essentially used by the government in order to incentivize businesses to undertake their activities into a more sustainable way, but also in terms of punitive taxation in order to stop businesses from undertaking certain harmful environmental practices. You also find tax on the social angle of ESG, the so-called fair share of tax, which comes from this need of a increased contribution of businesses to the community, which no longer is only by undertaking their activity, but also a very important aspect of contributing to the state budgets. And the concept of fair share of tax is quite interesting because not only it aims at preventing harmful tax practices and tax abuse, but also at legitimizing businesses in order to search for becoming more efficient and not being trapped in being overtaxed, such that they can continue to undertake their business activities and continue to develop. And last, but definitely not least, how tax translates into a tax governance and transparency, and how you can demonstrate, and businesses should be able to demonstrate, that they're aligning their ESG policy with their tax behavior, with the right processes and controls, and with a cooperative compliance mindset in place.
Shall I?
Yes, Greg.
Go ahead.
Floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe. So yeah, we wanted to just briefly show you what's happening in Europe when it comes to green or environmental taxation, because the EU made environmental objectives, or I would say even sustainability, one of its main objectives from a political perspective. So the objective of the EU is to be the first carbon neutral continent by 2050. And there is an interim step there, it's 2030, where basically the EU aims to have a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 55% compared to 1990. So you see that's already quite ambitious, and the idea is to combine that with sustainable growth, economic growth in the EU. So that is done by a combination of different measures that were released over the last summer in July, actually July 2021, in a package that was called Fit for 55, making a reference to this objective of 55% reduction. And there were two tax items there, two tax reforms. I would say the first one is the revision of the directive about energy taxation. So in this directive, basically you have different measures that are about how to tax energy that is used as a fuel for activities. So it's basically for the air transportation, maritime transportation, but also energy that is used for heating buildings and so on. So you see how to tax that, and basically the Commission here will be reducing the number of exemptions that were existing. And then a second one that was heavily discussed over the past months was the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So basically carbon tax that is applied on importations of certain goods that are imported in the EU. And the first ones will be, for example, cement, fertilizers, aluminium, steel, and electricity. So these there are five products that will be the first ones to be applied there, and this will kick in as 2023 for fully applying and being applicable in 2026. So you see a very ambitious, I would say, timeline. And now that we see in Europe an increase of the price of electricity, there is some doubt kicking in about would it be realistic to adopt that? So now to be seen if member states will be able to agree on that directives. I would say that will be challenging, and we'll have to follow the debate over the next months to understand what happens. But all in all, that's, I would say, what you have to keep in mind. Carbon prices are set to increase over the next years, and that's a tendency that will apply not only in Europe, but also beyond in developed economies. And now we will also have an incentive for non-EU countries to adopt a carbon pricing system similar to the EU ETS system. And basically that was one of the main ideas of that carbon border adjustment mechanism, is to first avoid carbon leakage. So basically having EU productions being outsourced to countries with less stringent carbon pricings or green legislations. And then also have an incentive for non-EU countries to adopt a similar carbon pricing system. And I would say, let's see if this functions. So that's it on environmental taxation. That will impact, I would say, businesses, of course, because prices are increasing. It will impact also consumers. But green taxation, in a way, is, I would say, the last dimension of taxation, where you will be able to say that you are optimizing your business model to pay less taxes, and it will be perceived as something positive, because green taxes are not meant to be paid. It's more an incentive to change your behavior. So you'll see this will be really important in how you communicate about how much taxes you pay one day. So this is fully part of the agenda of the Commission, and you see here that basically the Commission has a very heavy agenda for business taxation in Europe. The Commission released its vision about what should be business taxation in Europe in May this year, on the 18th of May 2021. And it was basically in the communication on business taxation for the 21st century where the Commission gave its vision for the next years. And there are different measures. And these measures are combined with the rest of what is on the agenda to basically achieve three goals. So the first one is green taxation that we just discussed. The second one is making the European economy and tax system ready for the digital economy, basically adopting the new changes. So it's not only the reforms that are under discussion at OECD level with the OECD Pillar 1 about having a reallocation of taxing rights to market jurisdictions and the minimum global taxation that is under Pillar 2. It's also helping tax administrations improve cooperation, adopt digital tools to improve their capacity, improve their capabilities to analyze data, because now everything is about data in Europe, and taxation will be also about producing the right data. So this, in a way, is meant to have a resilient tax system in Europe and secure tax revenues. So when it comes to improving tax transparency, you had, for example, beginning of 2021, the adoption of a new directive about administrative cooperation that will apply to digital platforms. So basically, digital platforms will need to report information to tax administrations about the sellers, the European sellers using the platforms. There will be this year probably, or beginning now, more probably beginning of 2022, a proposition for a new directive on administrative cooperation for cryptocurrencies and crypto assets. And before the end of this year, the Commission will propose what they call 8.3, so a new directive about the use of shell companies for tax purposes. So you see here, we are waiting the details, but what we know is that there will be new reporting obligations towards tax administrations when you use shell companies. And at the same time, some sort of anti-abuse rules to deny benefits to these kinds of companies. And in parallel to that, I would say tax transparency, but here towards the public, will increase, because before the end of the year, probably now in November, the EU Parliament should vote the public country-by-country reporting directive. So basically having multinational businesses operating in Europe being transparent on how much tax they pay in EU countries. And the Commission will propose publication of effective tax rates that are paid in Europe. So you see, I would say there will be a lot to communicate. And here the Commission is adopting what we could call a small step strategy. So by making small, I would say, reforms or imposing certain obligations, basically push businesses to communicate beyond the requirements and have a wider communication about what is the tax governance, what is also the impact on society with how much taxes are paid, and not only, I would say, corporate taxation, but also VAT, social contributions that are collected on employees. So I would say a lot will happen. One of the main challenges here will be the fact that tax legislation is adopted under a unanimity principle in Europe, meaning that all EU member states have to agree. And one member state can block the whole process, but we have seen with the previous Commission, with the Juncker Commission, that in a way the Commission was able to smartly leverage on policy to push for I would say unanimity in Europe. So I'm sure they will find new ways. They will continue to use state aid, for example, to do that and promote sustainability, especially in terms of tax transparency towards the public, and especially when you see the latest Pandora papers. It's about improving again transparency. So very interesting to see what will happen in Europe. That is just, I would say, a way to pressure policymakers to adopt that directives. And I just mentioned before public country by country reporting. So just to remind to everyone what it is. So basically, large MNEs, EU and non-EU ones actually, that are operating in the EU will be required to publish certain information about how much tax they pay in the EU member states, and then also in what we can call the tax havens that are listed in the black list that is that was updated actually this week, and the gray list. And this kind of information is, for example, the nature of activities, the number of full-time employees, the total turnover, how much taxes should be paid, how much taxes are actually paid, the accumulated earnings. And just to mention that this is already existing for financial institutions in Europe under the CRD4 directive, and also for the extractive and mining industry under the accounting EU directive. So you see that is just in a way an extension of the scope. The EU member states in the EU Council already adopted that on the 28th, a few days ago. I think it was on the 28th of September. And now this text is supposed to be adopted by the EU Parliament in November. So here we don't have a unanimity principle because this text has been conceived as an update to the EU Accounting Directive. It is about transparency and not about harmonizing taxation in Europe. That's why the legal basis is different, and that's why the adoption process is different, because here you will have EU member states in the Council adopting the text, and at the same time a co-decision or co-adoption by the EU Parliament. And here everything is under a qualified majority principle. So you see, very interesting to keep in mind that, because now there will be really an incentive to go beyond that figures. And the EU Tax Observatory, that is, I would say, a think tank existing in Europe now about making analysis about tax studies, and it's financed by the EU Commission. It was launched over last summer by the Parliament and the Commission, and they did actually an analysis of the data from banks, because banks are publishing that kinds of data since 2014 now. And basically, they commented on the data. Of course, the methodology can be criticized, and they don't take into account, for example, the kind of activities that are done in each country where the reporting is happening. But what we see is that only the raw data are published without any explanations. And I think that demonstrates why companies have an incentive to, in their sustainability strategy, to educate stakeholders and build a narrative around that data that are quite difficult to understand and that are very technical. So there is really an incentive, and that demonstrates why there is an incentive to, once this will be adopted, to first understand how you're structured, how is your governance, how your governance is mature, and then really do, in a way, a public relation exercise and build a narrative around that and explain that data. So really, this is developed by the Commission as part of the corporate social responsibility of companies in Europe. And that's why you have to keep in mind that it's not only a tax matter now, it's rather an ESG matter. As Joao mentioned, it's really linked to the whole, I would say, strategy, the broader corporate and sustainability strategy of the company. I'll pass on to Joao for the next part.
So on this slide, and I mean, we've tried to essentially summarize what we've been saying up to now, and we're not only trying to generate the panic, and we're saying that, well, we've just settled in applying ATAT 2 and there's an ATAT 3 coming, or we've just settled in with ADAC 6 and there's already a DAC 8 foreseen for next year. But essentially, to summarize all this into what's essentially at stake is the tax behavior of the taxpayers and how that aligns with their ESG strategy and how that is measured by the authorities and by taking into account, let's say, the overall rules which are published in this sense. And all this has been pushed throughout the years, and mainly after the aftermath of COVID and all the need, of contributing into the state budgets and to transparently and openly communicate to the market and to not only your shareholders but also to your stakeholders. So, Greg, if you can just flip onto the following slide. This is really how we see all this materializing, and the way to do that is through your and through each business's tax governance, because the tax governance is no longer only or a tax function is no longer only looking at tax returns, reviewing tax returns, and filing those tax returns or doing those filing obligations. It goes far beyond that. And how tax governance integrates, and in a way integrates all of this that we have been telling you about, is how a tax strategy has been developed, how a tax function has been developed, how the protocols have been put in place in order for the people undertaking that tax function are able to decide, are able to analyze tax risks which are being incurred by the companies, and that they have oversight of that, and that they decide on how to deal, how to handle them. Not only the production of tax returns, but also how all these processes integrated to something wider, and then how that translates into a report that Greg was mentioning, how all this, how a narrative can be built around this, how this translates into a report, which is then understandable by stakeholders, not only by the internal stakeholders, but by the external stakeholders, not only by the local authorities, but by foreign authorities, and not only by tax authorities, but also by wider scope of authorities. Also important if those taxpayers want to engage into conversations or into discussions with policymakers, that they're able to demonstrate how transparent they are in relation to their taxes, how well the tax function is organized, and how sustainable the management of their tax affairs is, and how that is tested and assured. And of course, this cannot just live on its own. It needs to be integrated into the overall financial reporting of the business, and how that gets communicated out to the investors, because this again is an alignment of your tax behavior to the ESG policy of the company. Greg, feel free to add anything you want or to flip over.
Thank you, Joao. I'll just flip over in the interest of time. So as Joao mentioned, it's really about also understanding what is happening and how you're positioned there. I would say now we see more and more market players taking interest into EU tax policy, or even tax policy at Luxembourg level, international level, investing in capabilities to be able to follow the tax agenda and being able to engage with policymakers. I would say that's really crucial to be able to understand what is happening, because as you've seen in the past, in the previous slides, complexity is continuously increasing and will continue to develop in Europe, and that's one, I would say that's the main source of risk in businesses, complexity. And it's really important to understand what is happening, understand the future trends, to be basically able to take preemptive actions to adapt already the strategy, the governance, and being able to meet the expectations of stakeholders, investors, media, the public, anticipate future risks or bad press that might be done if you see the latest scandals that happened. So I would say really now there is, I would say, an incentive to connect with policymakers, follow the tax developments, and actually tax, especially policymakers are really keen to hear from businesses what's happening, what is their feeling, how they are organized, because this will help also policymakers to adapt legislations and make informed decisions. That's also a new way to, I would say, instead of looking for certainty through tax structuring, now you can you have this new trend where businesses are trying to find tax certainty in at the time of the tax policies adopted. And so that's really a change of trends and a change of how to apprehend taxation. So once you have really understood what's happening, how you're positioned, how you're organized, it's really important to integrate all that in the tax strategy of the business. And there are many dimensions to take into account. So it's not only about tax, but tax is really interconnected with the broader corporate strategy of the company, the corporate governance of the company or the business. Same for the controls. And now there is also a link with the sustainability strategy and also the net zero, I would say, strategy. So basically, what are the objectives in terms of environmental objectives the company is developing. So here you see that you need to interconnect all the strategy and integrate fully what you're doing in tax with other dimensions in the company. And that strategy is really crucial to be able to identify future gaps and how to address the gaps and basically transform the governance in the company, in the business, to be able to have right tax governance and being able to grasp all the dimensions composing, I would say, composing the governance. And you saw on the previous slide with Joao, so governance, I would say there are 5 main building blocks, which are the oversight itself, the data, technology, also people that are, and processes. So that are the 5, I would say, dimensions that are really important to integrate there. And then that will allow also to produce the right data, because now it's everything about data. That will help you also being able to do the next step, which is communicating about tax and tax governance, basically being transparent and explain basically your tax behavior. And here, what is really important is to keep in mind that there are, I would say, tax reporting frameworks or best practices that exist. They are developing there a lot, but I would say the 2 main that we'll show you just after are the GRI 207 and the one that is done by the World Economic Forum, new metrics. So basically that helps you shape, even shape your governance, but also shape the narrative around your tax governance. And now we see that there are even benchmarks of businesses on how much they have adopted these standards. And some of them are even going beyond, looking to have external assurance on their communication. We have good examples like Anglo American, BP, NN Group, Vodafone, that are even having an external assurance and a voluntary assurance about what they are communicating on their tax governance. So that's really interesting. And one last thing is that now there is a new regulation, CSDR, that will come into force. So there will be extensive communication about sustainability. So there is an incentive to really plug taxation there, because it's not, it's part of that, but indirectly. So you see the ESG journey is quite long. It will require time and resources. So it's already time to act and integrate all that processes in your organization.
The upside is, of course, how this translates into added value, into the brand and into the business, and what that then represents in terms of being able to go out to the market and getting funding, in terms of being able then to sell the business or portions of the business, or to integrate into other businesses. And this is a trend that we've been seeing from our clients, is also a concern on how the tax function is dealing with the tax risks, on how the tax strategy is set in a digestible document, how that gets translated and communicated out. That's also very important, at least for some clients now looking ahead and pricing businesses that they want to invest in.
Yeah, that's true, that now we see certain, notably, I would say, institutional investors trying to influence basically the companies they invest in, and already assess if these kinds of practices already exist. And what we see now is that, depending on what is existing, they are trying to impose transformations on the companies or the groups they invest in, and trying to be, in a way, standard setters and promote the adoption of practices that are best in class. So, and that we see also clients benchmarking themselves towards their competitors. So it's really a changing world, I would say, about how tax is envisaged. So as I said, there are two, I would say, main frameworks or standards that are out there existing. The first one is the GRI, so the Global Reporting Initiative, and their standard about taxation is the number 207. And you see there are 4 parts. The first one is what we discussed until now. It's first the approach to tax. So what is the strategy? Who is accountable? The regulatory compliance. So you see, really, it's more about how things are done. And then also explaining the governance, the controls, so going into more details about how tax risks are identified, how tax risks are controlled and managed, and then what is the assurance that's provided over that governance to make sure that everything is functioning well, to make sure that the board, for example, has the right oversight on tax and is accountable, who is accountable in that organization. But one thing that is also important, and we mentioned, is about how you engage with stakeholders. And here, GRI 207 is also, I would say, not imposing, but promoting explanations about how relationships are built with tax authorities, with advocacy, and also other kinds of stakeholders. So that's really important. And I would say that's a new trend now that is really seen as something very positive. It's to have businesses really engaging with stakeholders like tax authorities, policymakers, to help them build and design tax legislation to make sure that it fits the economy and the purpose. And the last thing is country by country reporting on tax. Here it's a voluntary one, but in a way it's very similar to what the EU is trying to adopt. And we've seen, for example, that these kinds of debates are also discussed. There were certain proposals in the US. Of course, they were not adopted because the legislative process in the US is more complex. But at least to mention that certain other countries are starting the reflection of having these kinds of data being publicly available. So for the time being, it's this kind of data are exchanged with tax administrations, but now you see that there is an increasing will to have that being publicly available. And then to switch to the second standard, it's the World Economic Forum. So they have a core metric about the total taxes that are paid. So here the idea is to, instead of only focus on corporate taxation, it's to demonstrate that basically companies really contribute to society through the taxes and the different types of taxes they are paying or collecting on behalf of others. For example, social contributions that are collected on their employees and many other things, VAT. And then this metric can be complemented with 2 additional ones about the taxes that are remitted. So you see, it's really, I would say, one good way to envisage that is probably a combination of all that, because explaining how much taxes are paid is really what is the impact on society. And then how much taxes are paid is also the result of how tax is governed and managed, and basically is the result of what we have in the GRI standards. So you see both dimensions are interconnected. So it's really important to keep in mind that you can leverage on these standards to improve communication about tax. Now, I'll leave the floor to Joao.
We can conclude together. This is our final slide. There was a lot of information which we've addressed. There was a lot more that we wanted to address as well. But fortunately, the time is limited, so we don't have to bother you with all the details we'd like to touch base upon. We've summarized everything we've said essentially with 6 key takeaways. And as you will see, it's the trend is that definitely there's an expectation for taxpayers to understand the landscape around taxes, to set a tailored strategy and how they position themselves within that landscape, and then to develop a proper tax function, how to address in all the protocols. And having a tax function doesn't necessarily mean that they have to do everything in-house, but at least how those issues are addressed and tackled, who has the overview, what are the protocols to deal with them. And then there's a definite push on developing a narrative around taxes, how to show, okay, what is your effective tax rate? How do you show that rate? It's not just a number, it's also a narrative and how you come up with that number, and how then you integrate that into your overall sustainability reporting. With that, I leave the floor for Greg if he wants to add anything, or otherwise we can move on to the questions and answers.
I would suggest to move on to the questions in the interest of time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gregory. Thank you very much, Joel. Very, very interesting. I mean, okay, Joel, you were just saying, I mean, there's so much more you could have said. Wow. I mean, I must say, I mean, it's super condensed and well done. I mean, the very, very well prepared deck, super clear, and it's very, very kind of you. Thank you very much again. I think it's a perfect opportunity, as Gregory and Joel were mentioning, to open the floor to any questions you may have. There are no stupid questions. I'm sure I have many such questions myself. I think there is one question in the chat box from Sarah. I believe you may have seen that, Joel and Gregory, yourselves. So what's the alignment? I mean, how much alignment is there between non-EU jurisdictions versus what's going on? I think it's a very good question, actually. Is there, what is, or to what extent is there an alignment between non-EU jurisdictions and EU jurisdictions, and especially, of course, vis-a-vis the US? If maybe one of you has insight or input on this to give.
Well, it's a very good question, because here it's important to keep in mind that the EU, in terms of sustainability, EU wants to be a standard setter in the world and have a leading role. So I would say when it comes to sustainability itself, EU is really in advance to other geographies. And when it comes to tax, probably that's a new topic, especially for US. We started to have discussions with US businesses. And it's true that now they are starting to have an eye on what's happening in Europe, and they want to better understand how it will impact them. But I'm sure that the US, little by little, will catch up on that topic. So it's just a matter of time to have other non-EU jurisdictions adopting same approaches about tax governance and tax communication.
Yeah, and if you think that a lot of this comes also from discussions in the World Economic Forum that Greg was just making reference to, so all these are being certainly discussed. The US is a good example because even though they're obviously not at the same pace or at the same level in terms of ESG as the EU jurisdictions are. If you start looking at some of the measures that President Biden wants to implement, we see that probably the trend is for that gap to be closed in. But you also need to think that US businesses invest into Europe. And so this will also become a requirement for them in that scenario. And then if they've already settled those practices by having their foot into the EU jurisdictions, then it becomes easier for them to export worldwide and to be able to leverage on that as well. So we see that trend also with interactions with our US counterparts, that there's definitely a buzz around this, even from that side of the Atlantic.
That's good. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. And I believe that clearly answers the question. Thank you very much. I do have one question on my side, is perhaps how mature the Luxembourg players are on the tax governance of their own structures in Luxembourg. What's your gauge? What's your gauge? What's your feeling about that?
So we with Joao, we have surveyed a selected number of clients to have a good view on the market and a good representation on how businesses are mature in terms of governance. I would say, especially if you look at data and technology, here I would say in majority, almost 90% are lagging in terms of adopting the right production of data and technology tools. When it comes to dimensions like people oversight and procedures, it's a bit better, but it's still developing. So you only have, I would say, 15% to 20% of businesses in Luxembourg on average that are, I would say, mature in terms of really mature or even advanced in terms of tax governance. So I would say it's work in progress. And and it, as I said, it takes time and resources. So that's something, it's a staged approach. So I would say it's time to act and take the time to do it properly. It cannot be done overnight or in a few months.
Super. No, very clear. Thanks a lot, Gregory. Gregory, Joao, I don't think there are any further questions. I think your presentation has been very clear, very complete. And I'm sure, as you said, there's a lot more you could have said, arguably, but then again, your slides are really complete. So thanks again. Thank you to Deloitte. Thank you, both of you, for taking the time to speak today. We fully appreciate Deloitte's support to the tax group of the British Chamber and the British Chamber in general. You're a very, very supportive member. So thanks again. Thank you. My thanks again to Altidomus and LuxDates for generously sponsoring this event. We look, as in the beginning of this, in my introduction, this is the first of several events for our leadership forum, which will culminate in an in-person event next week. It's all on the BCC website. And so next up, I think it's tomorrow, on whether financial services meet their sustainability goals. Again, moving from tax to financial services, and then from then to business innovation, and then to legal. My takeaway. One of my many takeaways from this from this event is, as you rightfully put it and demonstrated throughout your talk, Joao and Gregory, is basically, yes, there's no T in ESG, but there's a lot of it nonetheless behind the scene. So that really is, essentially, and that will increase, right? Over the years. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your time. And hopefully we can actually catch up on a similar event maybe next year. Thank you very much to all of you for your participation today. Thanks a lot. And wishing you all a great, great day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.